Modern instruments found a sealed chamber hidden inside Machu Picchu. No one is permitted to open it. The scans suggest ritual basins, carved channels, and a purpose nobody fully understands. And the disturbing possibility is this: the people who built Machu Picchu may have wanted it to stay sealed forever, even from their own descendants. What they decided to do with this city is the part that should disturb you most. Machu Picchu was not abandoned because of war, not disease, not conquest. It was abandoned and then deliberately erased from maps, from memory, from oral tradition. A city of royal ceremonies, solar temples, ritual chambers, and hundreds of priests simply stopped being named. The people who knew it chose silence so completely that when the Spanish swept through the region century after century, nobody said a word, not one name, not one whisper. That is not neglect. That is a coordinated decision. And decisions that precise are made for reasons. But to understand what they were protecting, we need to go back further than most documentaries dare. The story doesn't begin with the Incas. It doesn't begin in the 15th century. It begins somewhere older, with people who were building in these highlands long before the Inca Empire existed, long before Pachacuti was born, long before anyone used the word Inca at all. What they left behind changes everything you think you know about what comes after. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part almost no one ever hears about. By approximately 1000 CE, the Andean highlands held cultures of real complexity. They left behind circular funerary towers called cholpas, built not for the living, but for the relationship between the living and the dead. These were not tombs, they were communion points. The positioning of these structures reveals a civilization that had spent centuries working out exactly what happens when a person disappears from this world. Here is what makes that unsettling. These pre-Inca structures keep appearing in the exact regions where the Incas would later build their most sacred sites. It forces a question most scholars avoid. Did the Incas choose these locations because they were spiritually powerful, or because something was already there, something older, something that lent authority to whatever they constructed on top of it? The Inca Empire ran on a single strategy: absorb, amplify, rename. They never destroyed local gods. They promoted them, rebranded them, and quietly claimed the whole mythology as their own invention. Around 1400 CE, the Inca expansion reached this region, not with pure destruction, but something more dangerous, a strategy of absorption. They absorbed local gods, renamed them, and claimed the mythology. A mountain at 2,400 meters, near a dormant volcano worshipped as divine, was selected for something the world had not seen. The mountain mattered. In the Andean worldview, mountains were living presences, protectors tied to fate, weather, and survival, which means the Incas were inheriting sacred geography, not inventing one. Now we reach the engineering, and this is where every confident explanation starts to crack. For decades, historians dated construction to the mid-15th century, based on Spanish chronicles written by men who had never set foot on the site. Then came radiocarbon analysis, not of the stones, but of human bones buried in the site's cemeteries, bones that have not moved since the beginning. The dates came back wrong. Occupation begins in the 1420s and 1430s. Pachacuti, the ruler history credits with building Machu Picchu, had not yet consolidated power. So who was here, and what exactly were they building? The construction method is called ashlar. Stone blocks cut so precisely they interlock without mortar, distributing seismic energy across the full structure, rather than concentrating it at joints. Machu Picchu sits in one of the most seismically active zones on the planet. It has survived dozens of major earthquakes across 6 centuries. Modern structural engineers study it as a passive anti-seismic system, one that outperforms most contemporary design. None of it used heavy machinery. No wheel for heavy transport existed here. No animal strong enough to haul 15-ton blocks up a near-vertical 2-kilometer climb. And still, the blocks are there. The agricultural terraces are a separate problem. More than 100 of them step down the mountainside, each one angled precisely to maximize sun exposure while controlling erosion. Beneath the stone surface runs a hidden drainage system, layers of crushed rock moving rainwater away from foundations before it can do any damage. An aqueduct nearly 2 kilometers long fed 16 fountains, engineered so that dropping elevation increased water pressure as it flowed, a hydraulic principle European engineers would not formally document for another century. Nothing here is improvised. Every channel, every angle, every gradient was calculated. No document survives that explains any of it. But the terraces are not the strangest part. Then there's the stone in the sacred plaza, cut at 32 distinct angles, each face meeting its neighbor at a different degree, and it fits the surrounding masonry without a gap. The famous 12-angled stone in Cusco is cited as a marvel of Inca precision. This one has nearly 3 times as many angles. The people who cut it solved a 3-dimensional geometric problem with hand tools, at a tolerance that modern laser equipment reaches only with difficulty. You cannot look at that stone and believe you understand how this city was built. What we call an explanation is a placeholder. The actual answer is still missing. If mysteries like this are exactly why you watch this channel, subscribe, because the deeper researchers looked, the stranger Machu Picchu became. Then the city goes silent, around 1527, as smallpox swept through the Inca Empire ahead of any Spanish soldier, killing the emperor before European contact. Machu Picchu was abandoned. Within 1 generation, a place that had held royal ceremonies and solar rituals stopped being spoken of. The Spanish spent 200 years surveying Inca territory, interviewing survivors, stripping every site they located. Not one colonial document names Machu Picchu, not one mention across 2 centuries of search. Geography does not explain that. Local people already lived on these terraces. They were not hard to reach. They were simply never asked, or never answered. Farming families worked the ancient terraces within decades of abandonment. They knew exactly where they were. They saw nothing requiring mention to strangers. But that explanation collapses when you consider what kind of civilization the Incas actually ran. The Quipu system encoded complex administrative data in knotted strings. Relay runners carried information across 40,000 kilometers of road, the length of the entire equator, in days. This was not a society that lost track of things. They stopped saying this name, deliberately, as if keeping it unspoken was the last protection they could still offer to whatever had existed here. Then, after centuries of silence, someone finally climbed the mountain. Enter Hiram Bingham. In 1908, the Yale lecturer visited Peru and became obsessed with finding Vilcabamba, the mythological final refuge of the Inca rulers after the conquest. He spent years raising money. The National Geographic Society finally agreed to fund an expedition. In July 1911, Bingham reached the Urubamba River Valley and started asking farmers about ruins. A man named Melchor Arteaga mentioned something on the peaks above and offered to guide him for a small payment. It was raining. Bingham almost said no. His entire expedition team decided not to go. He climbed alone. He reached a terrace after an hour of climbing and found 2 small boys working in a garden. Their family had farmed this land for years, surrounded by fitted ashlar walls, intact stone fountains still moving water, temple doorways with their lintels unbroken. They found none of it extraordinary. Bingham stood among ruins they called home and understood very slowly that he had found something enormous. He had also found something he completely misread. Bingham published the discovery as Vilcabamba, the lost last capital of the Inca Empire. He was wrong. Jean Savoy would prove decades later that Vilcabamba sat deep in a different jungle at a completely different site. But the misidentification tore open a question. If this was not the final Inca capital, what was it? Because Bingham's own excavations found no gold, no weapons, no garrison, no evidence of military function at all. What his team found instead pointed toward something stranger and considerably harder to explain. He found cemeteries. More than 50 funerary caves positioned carefully around the site. High-status women buried with bronze jewelry, ceramic vessels, and in several cases, the mummified remains of their animals. Small green stones unlike any material used in Inca construction. Possibly a recording medium older than the quipu, storing information in a system that nobody has decoded. And something Bingham had no category for. Rooms where sound behaves in ways the surrounding structure should make physically impossible. Acoustic chambers, not agricultural, not administrative, built for a relationship between stone, enclosed space, and the human voice, and nothing else. Remember the sealed chamber mentioned at the start? This is where the story becomes difficult to explain, and what modern instruments later found beneath the city may be the strangest part of all. Modern investigation did not resolve these questions, it multiplied them. The protected zone around Machu Picchu covers more than 300 square kilometers. The citadel in every photograph is a small fraction of that. Beginning in the 2010s, research teams with LiDAR, drone-mounted laser systems that pass through vegetation and read the terrain beneath, started scanning the surrounding jungle. What they found matched no existing archaeological model. Straight lines buried under centuries of growth, rectangular enclosures, geometric patterns, structures arranged as part of a system far larger and more deliberate than anything visible from any trail. The city above the clouds is not the whole city. Then, ground-penetrating radar found the chamber. Behind a wall inside the citadel, standing 6 centuries, never disturbed, the instruments detected a void, a sealed room. Imaging showed carved stone basins, raised platforms arranged like altars, and narrow channels cut into the floor with the same hydraulic precision found throughout the site. Analysis of the channel geometry pointed to a ritual function, not drainage, not irrigation, not any domestic purpose. A system designed to move water in a particular sequence for a particular reason. The researchers called it a purification chamber. Water here was not a resource, it was ceremony. The Peruvian Ministry of Culture and UNESCO were notified. The answer came immediately. The chamber stays closed. Engineers determined that a single test bore could destabilize the surrounding structure. The mountain's geology and seismic record make any intervention a serious structural risk. The teams were authorized to scan, not to open, not to enter. The chamber remains sealed as it has been for 600 years. The instruments confirm something is inside. They cannot say what it contains. Under current rules, no one is permitted to find out. That is where the investigation ends. At which point every major theory falls apart. The Pachacuti retreat theory collides with radiocarbon dates showing activity before he held power. The solar observatory model cannot account for the funerary structures, acoustic chambers, or the sealed hydraulic system below the floor. The chosen women theory fits the burial evidence better than anything else, but explains nothing about the pre-Inca presence, nothing about the sealed room, nothing about the removal of the city's name from every surviving record. Not one theory withstands full contact with all the evidence. Every researcher decides what to examine directly and what to leave in the periphery. What none of them address is the most quietly devastating detail. The Inca Empire built 40,000 kilometers of paved road. It ran a continent-wide administrative system without writing. It preserved centuries of history in the quipu, and it produced no record of what Machu Picchu was for. The main temple aligns to the solstice sunrise with a precision that required years of observation before a single stone was placed. The water system still functions partially after 6 centuries without maintenance. The builders knew exactly what they were constructing. They chose not to say. Whatever they wrote, if they wrote at all, has not survived. That silence is the last piece of evidence we have. The Temple of the Moon, carved into the rock of Huayna Picchu behind the citadel, has been studied for decades. Accessible, documented, still not explained. Bingham noticed something about the site's staircases that he never resolved. Every major Inca city uses staircases symbolically to encode hierarchy, to mark cosmological transitions, to direct movement with intention. Here, they go everywhere, to everything, without apparent logic. Terraces, doorways, fountains, other staircases, as if the city was built for people who already carried its meaning inside them and needed nothing from the architecture to tell them where to go or why. A city visible from orbit that no Spanish soldier ever located, farmed by local families for generations who found nothing worth reporting to outsiders, containing a sealed chamber that modern instruments can outline but no living person may enter, that surrendered its own name the moment it was abandoned, as if the name itself was part of what needed hiding. Machu Picchu was not lost. Read carefully, the archaeological record points to something more deliberate. It was concealed, and the only thing more unsettling than the possibility that something has remained untouched for 600 years is the possibility that the people who sealed it knew exactly what they believed the world was never supposed to find, and made that choice without hesitation.